Hello everybody, this is Bleakborn, and today I want to talk more about vivariums. I felt like in the last video I did not cover enough things, so today I have some other stuff I want to cover. So some of you might be wondering what vivariums actually are and what is their purpose. Well, I did kind of touch the subject in my last video. I feel like I need to reiterate. A vivarium is a tank designed to enclose a certain type of animal and allow the most natural ecosystem possible for that animal. What is the purpose? It's to create a tank where you aren't changing out the dirt and not changing out the substrate and dirt constantly, and you're not spending time cleaning each individual piece in the house. The bugs that are in the tank will actually do a lot of that work for you. Some of you might be wondering why build a planted tank in the first place. Well, you can get away with running plastic plants and other different like plastic things in a tank and change out the substrate constantly, but like I said, you don't have to change out the substrate so often. So if you're a busy person and you want the tank to pretty much take care of itself besides us feeding or two and maybe scooping out poop or changing the water out once in a while, a planted tank is the best bet. If you like plants and you can semi-grow a plant, you will greatly enjoy a planted tank. That brings us to the topic, what is the right planted tank for you? Well, there's four main types. Obviously, there's terrariums, vivariums, paludariums, and aquariums. Terrariums are solely plant tanks. There's usually no animals in there. Sometimes you find isopods or springtails, but generally it is just designed to house plants. Vivariums are designed to house a certain animal within, or multiples depending on what species you're running. Sometimes with Pac-Man frogs you only want one in one tank, and most of the time with dart frogs and stuff you can only really have one species in there. You might be able to have multiples, but it's usually just one species. A paludarium is a little interesting, and that's my next big build I want to do. Is it's partially water, partially land. That is also much like a vivarium, but you can have the same stuff you would have in an aquarium and the same stuff you'd have in a vivarium, and as a living, breathing ecosystem with water. Generally, those have to be fairly big, and they have to have a lot of, water filtering systems, and what do they call it? A lot of filtering systems and different kind of plants in place, and they're a little more complicated to keep going, but they can give you a really cool effect where you'll have a river flowing through a landscape, and with, like salamanders or something that flows into like a little pond that has goldfish and maybe like an axolotl in it, and that's kind of what a general paludarium is. And then lastly, there's planted aquariums. They're a little harder to do, but you can plant live plants in aquarium, and besides a water change once in a while, the plant should be able to recycle most of the waste, depending on what fish you are. Using goldfish are kind of a bad example because they produce a lot of waste. My next topic is why use a background or make a background. Well, generally it's used for animals to climb up around, for plants to grow. A lot of plants are climbing vines, used to growing up tree trunks, and you kind of need that surface area to grow plants. But it's not necessary. If you want to skip building a background, you can get away with putting a large piece of driftwood in the center of the tank or against one edge and allowing the plants to grow up that. Or if you have a lot of terrestrial plants you'd want to keep in a tank and you're in your vivarium and there's not very many animals that will dig them up, then that might be a good choice as well. But with at least my Pac-Man frog, he or she will definitely dig up any plant that's in a tank. in her current tank, I have these little planter pots to keep her from digging out the roots of the plants. But when she gets into this new tank, I only have 3 terrestrial plants, and they all are well rooted in at this point. God, it's a mouthful. What materials do you use as a background? Well, I personally am using cork and Malaysian driftwood and coconut fiber as the gap filler, but behind that you have gap fill foam and use silicone, and in mine I have a plastic channel dedicated to being able to pull the pump for the water feature in and out. But that is not necessary. To build the background, you really just need the spray expanding foam and the GE1 silicone, either black or clear for the silicone, and then you can only get the foam in orange. I call it orange, which is kind of like a yellow, and a black. If you want to, my next one I will definitely get black and black, so I don't have to worry about showing the sides as much, and it will blend in. You could also black silicone the edges where you will put the foam to hide the orange or yellow foam. But yeah, you can get away with using cork bark or other bark types that are available for your whatever's safe for your animal. And you will really want to research what your animal's needs and what's are good for it. And some stuff might be poisonous, some stuff might not, and you might never ever run into it being a problem, or you'll have a trouble right away and you'll know. So really, really do your research. You can also buy ghost wood for the background, which I'm using in my tank. I just remembered it's supposed to get covered in a thin layer of moss, but has not done that in my tank yet. It's supposed to go pretty dark in moist environments, but mine's still white as a ghost. The next question to answer is, why do you need a drainage layer? Well, the drainage layer is to keep your soil from getting soggy and muddy and producing bad types of bacteria. You want your soil to be able to get really damp, really wet, and then have all that water drain into another area to keep your soil from getting super soaked. Generally, you build a drainage layer out of egg crate, or in my case, I am using, what is it called? Hydro balls. They're little, what do they call it? Man, I should have done my homework first. But they're made out of like a terracotta material that absorbs water and holds water, and then allow the tank to retain its moisture. And that's another reason you want to put in a drainage layer, is to keep the moisture in the tank, because otherwise, if you have like an egg crate one, it doesn't really hold the water in it, and you'll have to replace the water a little more often. And another thing with the false bottom, it's easier to replace the water if you want to do a water change. Sometimes you don't have to. If it starts smelling like a swamp, you're going to want to. Let's see. What makes a good substrate? Well, when you're building your substrate, you want to make sure you can order AVG or different things, but the real concept is you want a biodegradable material in there. You want something that can retain moisture, either sphagnum moss or bark of some kind. Even peat moss will retain a little bit of, or even peat will retain a little bit of moisture. And then you want to have multiple different sizes of particles in the substrate to kind of give it a more natural look, and have different sizes and crevices for the little isopods and bugs to kind of hide around. And they need food in there to eat as well, and that's where you're mixing in dead leaves for the biodegradable wood, a bunch of other different kinds of, peat moss is a good biodegradable, and even sphagnum moss, though that takes forever to downgrade or degrade. I should have practiced my breathing today, because I am just getting winded every time I talk. The next big question is, what are isopods and springtails, and why are they important? Well, I had to do a little bit of research to find out the exact needs, and then once I found out what they do for the tank, I'm like, I gotta get me some. So, isopods are the roly-poly bugs. They are the, wood lice. They have a bunch of different names, but generally they are a crustacean. They're in the crustacean family, and all they do is break down plant material and change it into a dirt. And that's why you want to put a leaf litter layer, but I'll get into that later. Springtails, on the other hand, are similar little bugs that eat mold, eat all sorts of stuff. Springtails are used to help break down mold, plant matter, the waste from the creatures, and turn it into something that the plants in the tank will be able to digest and use for nutrients. And that's pretty much what the point of them are, is to take your dead plant material, take the waste from your animals, and convert it into nutrients for the plants in the tank, to really make it a bioactive substrate, to keep the tank alive. The next big question is watering a vivarium. In mine, I first started out by just spraying it a couple times a day, and I put a little water feature, but I still wasn't getting the moisture levels I wanted. So I ended up getting a fogging system, but there's other options. You can get a drip system, you can get a misting system. The misting and a fog are very close and similar, but one will drench your tank. The misting system will drench your tank really quickly. It's like a little mini downpour. I personally think the fog looks really cool. It's one of my favorite things to watch slowly flow into the tank and fill it, and then just kind of watch everything disappear. But you can choose many different options, and just make sure you do your research on what animal you have and are wanting to get. And the last big topic I wanted to talk about before I just start ranting on different random things is the cost of the vivarium itself. They are incredibly expensive and sometimes very inexpensive. So what you gotta do when deciding you want to build a vivarium is first do your research. Second, compile a list of stuff you want to get for it, and do some planning, like what do you want where do you want to do this, and then I'd recommend going out and hand-picking cork bark pieces you want, going out and picking out a branch or two that you want to put in the tank before anything else, and then bring those back home, put them in your tank and look at it, and kind of move them around, decide how you want them to look, and then once you're satisfied with the look, then you get the rest of your material. I mean, you probably could get the foam and silicone, but then you go and you get your black foam and your black silicone, and you decide if you want to put planter pots in the background. There's a lot of little details. But then once you've decided on, you're doing a background, and you've gotten your pieces of wood that you want to use for your background, you've gotten your planter pots, and you're ready to foam it all in. Next, make sure you're leaving enough room for the substrate, because at 2 to 3 inches down, there's no point in having your wood because it's just going to be hidden in the substrate layer. So that's a place you can save money, is not wasting it all on the depth. The next thing you want to do is really think about your drainage layer. This is also before you foam in the background. You want to make sure, if you're going with egg crate, you want to make sure that is all prepped as well. If you're going more for the route of hydro balls and a mesh, you can kind of fudge it a little bit, but you still want to get an inch or two for the drainage layer. More if you're doing a water pond or something in your tank. I would recommend, depending how deep you want your thing, you sometimes would be better doing a tall tank and going, like those standard exoterras, you can go all the way up to the little vent, and that's kind of where you want your substrate layer to be at. The next thing after you've decided your substrate layer, or your drainage layer and your background, and kind of did your measuring, and you're fully satisfied with placements, you're not going to add a water thing, you've added your drainage ports, you've added everything you need to go ahead with the tank. Then you foam in the background, and you fill those planter pots in any area that you don't want foam to get into with newspaper or paper or whatever you can. And then once that dries for, like, I think it's 24 hours, it needs to fully cure, but I'd say a day or two, and then you can start peeling and picking at the foam to get rid of the kind of bumpy, hard, glossy texture that it creates, because you want something rough for the silicone to adhere. So you can get a little... I took a little steak knife and I bent the blade, so I had a little saw and I could cut all the foam apart and kind of get in there and work with it and just kind of like cut away the foam. And then once you've pulled away the pieces you want and kind of generally shaped your tank, then you go in with silicone, and then you apply your coconut fiber mix that you want to use for your background. I just use coconut fiber. I don't think you need to add bigger particles into it. You can if you want to. It's all going to be hidden by plants and moss eventually anyways, so you don't need to worry about it so much. And then once you've fully let the stuff dry, you put the silicone on, and then you do little parts at a time, because silicone still dries a little bit. It doesn't dry that fast, so if you're not doing a huge background, you can get away with putting all the silicone in and then applying the background coconut fiber or whatever. Or you can do every, I don't know, like foot or so, or 6 inches square, and then applying your coconut fiber and going on to the next square, and then you really want to pile it in and leave it sit there overnight before tipping it over and letting it all fall down. And then you got to let it sit for a week or two. And if you keep smelling the vinegar smell from the silicone, I would generally wait until you can barely smell it or can't smell it at all before putting any substrate in there, any living things. I've planted plants before that's released, and I haven't had any die on me, but I wouldn't recommend it. You want to be extra safe. Then once you get that, you can put your drainage layer in there. Hopefully you've done a few tests to make sure your tank actually holds water, but if the tank is new, you should be okay. You can, you can fill it with your drainage material. If you had egg crate, then you would have already had foamed that in. It would have been solid once you've foamed in the background. But once you've done that, you can start putting your substrate in, filling the bottom area with water, and then planting your plants, and then doing a lot of watering. And then you kind of want to make sure your plants begin to take. You want to put moss down, you want to, put a leaf litter layer down, and then you can add your Springtails and Isopods, but you really want to kind of draw it out as long as you can to make sure everything establishes properly. And then finally, once the tank is living, your Isopods and your Springtails are working, you can finally introduce your animal. And you don't even have to get the animal until after you finish the tank, because all this work and effort's going to take a couple months before you can even throw the animal in the tank. And the amount of money you end up spending could be between $100 all the way up to $500-$600, depending on what you do. Make sure you also plan out your plants. There's a lot of little things that other videos won't tell you. They just show you how to build the background, have all these cool plants, and then they plant them, but they don't really tell you what all the little things are. And I felt like I should build this video for that purpose. If you have any more questions on vivariums, please let me know by leaving a comment down below. If you wish to subscribe for more of my content, or if you've liked the video in general, please leave a like. If you want to see more, leave a like as well. Thank you for watching.